The other thought was that if today anybody wants to get into conservation filmmaking, there was no avenue, no platform. It was only if you joined a big studio. So it was only limited. That was the only way you could do it. Like, I could only do it because I joined Riverbanks and I had access to Riverbanks. And also, you were mad enough to then pursue your dream. What about 10 more people who want to do that but don't have access, but want to get into conservation film? Can we have a platform for that?
Hello and welcome to Decoder and our podcast, Women in Nature. Women have been in the center of the fight to protect our environment, from indigenous women who preserved traditional ecological knowledge to modern activists who have advocated for sustainability. But it's still a challenge for women environmentalists to be taken as seriously as their male counterparts. In addition to the indigenous women, women have also been scientists, they've been ecologists, they have been writers, photographers, filmmakers, and artists. And yet we don't see enough women in decision-making roles and in policy-making roles. Women who have bucked this trend, made lasting change, and who have been trailblazers and pathfinders have often been labeled difficult women, but they have been difficult for Earth's sake. World-famous primatologist Jane Goodall once said, "It doesn't take much to be considered a difficult woman, and that's why there are so many of us." In this podcast, you will see and you will hear their stories so that we can better understand the interconnectedness between environmental issues and gender, a connection that highlights a more inclusive approach to conservation and sustainability.
So today I have with me Rita Banerji,
a multi-award winning filmmaker and conservationist. She has been an enormous catalyst for change. She's the founding director of the Green Hub, this fantastic project in the Northeast, where it's a platform where local filmmakers and artists from around the Northeast have come together to learn how to make films, to tell stories so that they can tell their own stories locally and have a say in how these stories are made and told. This is a pioneering project, never before tried in India, to empower local storytellers to become filmmakers and photographers. Rita is a Prithvi Ratna and National Geographic Award winner. In 2020, she won the Sanctuary Asia Earth Hero Award. She's the founder of Dusty Productions and a filmmaker herself.
I've known her for a very long time, and she's been a role model for me, and how she was one of the first really phenomenal wildlife camera people I knew in the field as a woman, because at the time when we began and started out, there weren't that many. So Rita, thank you so much for joining me on the Difficult Women podcast. I'm going to actually start out with that. When you were at Riverbank Studio, when I met you, and you were already this world-class level cinematographer, film, you were using the camera as a camera person should. You weren't just dabbling in it to make these films. How did that come about? When did that start for you?
Thanks, Swati, first of all, for having me on the show. It's very exciting to be here with you, in fact. And yeah, it's been so many years of knowing each other, and I admire your work also. You've been so long, you've been such a big spokesperson for environment. So thanks for having me here. So my journey with camera began when I was in college. My father gave me this old Agfa camera, and that time it was a film roll. So I remember that time it wasn't about taking too many pictures, because one roll used to be really expensive. So you took a 35mm roll, it was black and white. You took almost 1 month or 2 months or sometimes 3 months to expose those 36 frames. And when you went to the studio and got those photographs back, and that was my first hook. Seeing a black and white picture and seeing what you tried come out. And I think that's what started the journey. And I did not know that it would be a career. And Riverbanks was right behind IP College where I was studying. So I was fascinated by machines. So, that time the editing machines used to be these huge machines, and cameras used to be these huge cameras. And we got the chance to join there as production assistant. So I didn't even know whether we'll be allowed to touch the camera. But that way it was great to work with Mike, because he was like you can try out the equipment. But I remember the first time we pressed the roll button, it was almost 3 months after we'd been on a shoot. And just rolling those few seconds was such a thrill, you know. And I think that time being part of the crew, it wasn't just one person. It was, you had the Vitacam, you had the high band cameras, and the recorder was separate, and the tapes were huge. The tripod was big. So you had to be able to carry those tripods and carry those cameras, and only if you managed to do that, um, did you gain the respect of the crew, And yeah, so that's how the journey began, with the camera. And I think um, it was that was my I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I did not know that from the camera it'll move on to direction and move on to editing, and that it would be my career. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do remember Riverbank Studios at the time, and Mike, he was one of the few people I remember all that time ago who had hired a lot of women actually to work in a studio that kind of concentrated on wildlife and conservation film. And for me as well, I was very lucky that NDTV at the time, under Dr. Roy and Mrs. Roy, also had hired a lot of women. So that's what I'm coming to. Like, what sparked that interest for you? Was it something from childhood that when you looked at nature around you, that you had any experiences in nature that kind of sparked it? Or was it one of those happy accidents where you kind of look at and explore things that you wanted to do? Maybe you always wanted to tell a story and you found this medium to be a good way to do it.
Yeah, frankly speaking, Swati, as a kid, I had no idea what I was going to do. I mean, the education system itself doesn't allow you for that, right? I mean, the only thing I knew was that I was in my parents were both professors. We were in Merit University. So it was like a university campus, and I think only when I look back at my childhood do I realize that even in a university campus at that time, the water that we got was straight from the tap, and we had frogs around our house, but we took it for granted, and one grew up with that, one grew up with frogs, one grew up, but it was a university campus, there were no forests around. But we got fresh water with a lot of birds. I remember outside my house, which is still a very deep memory, there was a very small lawn, just like maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. There was a gulmohar tree, and we had, I think, at least 50 weaver bird nests hanging every year, and there were snakes in the garden, and a huge beehive on that tree. And ours was the only house which had that. So one felt really proud about that. But these are just memories. It wasn't about like this would be my career or that I love nature. It was just that one loved the outdoors. And even in a campus like that, even in a town like that, there was so much to see at that time. And the same place, if I go back now, there's no croaking of the frogs or the beehive or the bird nest. So I think we were fortunate enough to see that even in an urban setting, and but it wasn't like I had no idea that this would be a career, because that time careers were very medicine and engineering, and they were very fixed. And also one doesn't, because of you didn't have photography, you didn't have films as exposure, so you never knew whether you had that talent also. So it was just, the only thing I knew was I love sports, I loved outdoors, I love nature, I love gardening and things like that. But I had no idea that I would follow this path. So in that sense, yes, it was a very organic, from photography, somehow it became that path. And once I started working, started traveling, started using the camera, bit by bit, I knew this is what I wanted to do and nothing else. But yeah, during childhood, it wasn't like anything like that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when you really think about it, maybe those of us who were teenagers in the 80s and then sort of went into this field early 90s, really, I would say maybe
Yeah.
mid 90s.
Yeah.
In India, at least, maybe we were the first, I suppose, in a sense, those of us who went into that into a wildlife conservation space, not as scientists, amazing women scientists.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, as in storytelling for conservation, whether it was through the kind of films that you made at Riverbanks or at what we did at NDTV. So Rita, from that perspective, I know with Riverbanks, like one of the films of yours which really stood out for me and actually in many ways was important for me personally when I became an environment journalist, because I could see the kind of impact it had, and that gave me hope that the work that we did could have impact, was when you did the whale shark film, Shores of Silence. And it was an extraordinary piece of work, and I know that you extensively did the camera work for that. So, and I know post that film, the whale shark was made a Schedule 1 species. Actually, many sharks became Schedule 1 post that, and the shark finning thing also became like a huge topic that people spoke about, which hadn't been spoken about up until then. So tell me how that came about and what it felt like to be like the primary camera person on that film. And you guys won the Green Oscar for it as well. You won the Wild Snake Panda Award.
Yeah. No, Shores of Silence is a very special film, actually. And I think it took us a long time to make it, because it was also something like when India, you're making a wildlife film, you're always struggling between livelihood of the people and your wildlife. It's never a clear, black and white situation. So at that time, it was a fishing community. And like in the film, it was Mike who had heard about the, whale sharks. He had seen it as a child. And so we were making a film on the oceans that time with some department. And we went actually looking for the whale shark. And the local people told us that there's this, it's called the barrel, and barrel being the barrel, which is there in the film. So at that time, we used to shoot in 2 units. Actually, Mike did the main camera work, and I was the second unit camera. And that's how we used to work in most of the productions, as I grew as a camera person. So for the whale shark film also, it was like that. We were, in fact, how we discovered the village was that where we finally shot. There was a crew unit filming Mike on a film on lions. It was not very far from Greer. And me and another colleague, we were waiting for lions to come on the beach. There were a lot of lions on the seashore. Yeah. So another friend of mine, Krishna, and me, our duty was to try and get the lions on the beach. So every day we used to go there and wait there while the crew was filming with Mike in Greer. And one of the days we actually spotted the lions on the beach, one mother with 2 cubs. And it was a fantastic moment. We got that and we were very excited to go back and tell Mike about that. But at the same time, we went to the village of the forest guard who was with us. And as we walked to the village, just to get something, we saw the whale sharks on the beach, being dragged. And that's how we got to know that it wasn't just the main port where the trawlers were getting the whale sharks. It was the small boats which were carrying the whale sharks back to the beach. And that's when we realized the extent of it. And after we finished the lion shoot, all of us, Mike, me, and there were 2, Shabani was there, and the rest of the crew, we all spent time there filming the whale shark. So it wasn't just me filming. There were 2 units. Mike was filming with one camera. I was filming with another camera. And it was a tough shoot because we were actually filming the whale sharks being dragged back onto the shore. And those are the moments it's like, at one instant you feel that this is what you need for the story, for bringing a stop to the killing of whale sharks. At the same time, you're also seeing the whale shark being dragged. So as a camera person, I think you go through these emotions all the time, and it's like, but at the end of it, I think you're always moving with the long-term goal that what is it that's going to get you impact. And I think that whole time when we were filming with the whale shark, it was a very heart-rending, it was very difficult because it took a long time. I mean, you catch the whale shark, it's dragged back, and then seeing it being killed on the shore. And I think for both Mike and me, I think, and for the whole crew, it wasn't easy. But at the end of it, I think when the film came out and we were able to do what it did, I think that's the only thing you can look back at and say, yeah. So I think filming time it took us 4 years, by the way. It wasn't as if we got it at the first time. We got some footage in the beginning. Then next time we went, we didn't get anything. We just got the story of how the liver is used and all that. And then by chance on the third of, so it took us 3 years or 4 years to finally come out with a film. So yeah, but it was a fantastic experience, and yeah, so a very important film for us.
And Rita, when you were at Riverbanks, of course, there was you, there was Shabani, and then later on there were so many others, Shelby, Nina, everybody, and a lot of women in that. And that was unique, as I said, Riverbanks somehow seemed to have cracked that. But what, in your experience over the years, when you've done this work and you've worked or met other teams and you've looked around, I mean, do you see, or did you see that there's been a growing arc of more women coming into the space? And initially, did you see there weren't that many, and now there are so many more amazing women coming into the space? And what do you think changed that?
Yeah, it's Swati, like when you look at the wildlife filmmakers in India today, I keep saying that. I mean, I think each and everyone who's somebody in the wildlife filmmaking circle is a woman. I mean, you look at the landscape. You have Malaika, you have Gunjan, you have Doel, you have Akanksha. I mean, every name you take is a woman, and each one of them is like doing such fantastic work. And I keep talking about that. I'm like, this is just so fantastic. And it's not just films they are making. Each one is also trying to take the films beyond for impact. It was so. It's difficult to say that. At that time we never thought of it like that. I think we were also involved with what we were doing. For us, I think conservation was the main thing. I think even for these guys, that's the main thing. It's just a great feeling that so many women are there in this field. But I don't know what has changed that. Whether, I mean, I don't have an answer for that. I just feel fortunate that at least we were there at that time. You, me, Shivani, Nina, all of us working in the wildlife sector. And today that whole landscape has expanded. But I don't know how that has changed. It's difficult for me to answer. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
I don't actually, because when I started Born Wild, my show on NDTV, there was me, there was Gargi, and there was Mandakini, my camera person. And then Gargi and I would sort of do second camera. And we had these tiny little budgets, and we traveled all over India doing it. And funnily enough, I found out only after, as you said, you're exactly right. We were so focused on doing the work, we never thought of it in terms of being women or groundbreaking or glass stealing or any of those definitions didn't come into play, because we loved what we did. We were very grateful for doing what we were doing. But it's only a little bit into the process, much later, that I found out that when Born Wild began, it was just Mandakini, Gargi, and I. We were the first 3 all-women crew in the wild, in the field, in the world. It's not like, and if you think about that, it feels so bizarre, because Born Wild started in 2000, not in the 90s, So you would think that there would have been so much more, at least internationally. And somehow I feel actually India has more and stronger wildlife filmmaking women, or has had for a longer time, than the Western world has actually had. I think they have more women. I mean, the numbers of women are growing now, but I feel like India was one of the first countries that kind of had that first. And I've also wondered what the change is. And I would like to think that perhaps with Riverbank Studios and with places like NDTV sort of hiring more women and more women proving themselves in a sense, than maybe other companies and other places kind of also did the same and realized that there was a space for conservation and wildlife. And what's interesting about this is, and I come to the next question, is when women are in this space of conservation and wildlife, they're very inclusive of everybody. So have you found that, because you started Dusty for production with Shilpi, and you two of you were in charge, and you guys went out and did the projects, and you got the funding. And did you find it was harder, easier, or you had a track record of work so you could get the funding to do the work? Like, what's your experience been? Has there been any pushback? Have you ever at any point of time felt any pushback as a woman in this space?
Yeah, so it's so just going back a little bit, one of the things I think which has helped us is also the technology. Like when Shilpi and I started, so after Riverbanks, Shilpi and I started Dusty Foot in 2002, 2003. Both of us started, and to think about it, we were both women, and started a company. So it was pretty, again, I don't think we ever thought of it like that, but just since we're talking about that, one good thing was, I think we both were camera people, and we both were technical. So many of the films we could do it ourselves. We weren't dependent on anybody. We didn't have to hire a cameraman, or we didn't have to hire a camera person. So I think it was an all-woman crew all the time. All the films we did it ourselves. Initially, I think we had to do everything. If I think of starting a company, because we were doing two things. We were trying to learn the business also. It was after Riverbanks, it wasn't as if we were starting on a pedestal. After Riverbanks, we started from scratch again, because Shores of Silence, Last Migration, all the films which won the awards, they were under Riverbanks. So it wasn't as if we were, despite being part of the film, it wasn't as if we had made the film. So it was like starting from scratch. And starting from scratch means we got work as camera people, as editors. But it took some time before we got our first film. But I think after that, it was more to do with the kind of work we were doing. We did not face anything specifically, like it wasn't as if we didn't get projects because we were women. A lot of our work came from NGOs. And I think it was dependent on whether we managed to do that film in the field. In the field, yes, there were questions. Like our first film was with these fish workers in an island. And that island, only the men go. Women don't go. It's a transient fishing community. They go on this island. They set up these fishing camps. And only the men go, the women are there, and after the fishing season is over, they come back, and we had to document that. And there were Shilpi and I going to this village, to this island, only with men. And I think one of the National Fish Workers Forum person, a lovely person, Hare Krishna Devnath, I remember him telling, he said, he saw us carrying these heavy backpacks and equipment and everything. And he said, do you think you guys can wear saris and go there? And I'm like, I think Shilpi and I just looked at him and didn't even respond to that, So questions like this were there.
Yeah.
And I think in his mind, he must be wondering how the hell are these guys going to stay there? But that was it. Once he started seeing us work, we were lost in everything, morning to night with the fish workers. Living with them in the fishing camp. I think after that, there was no question of, he didn't ever talk about it again. At the same time, those guys also looked after us, which was quite incredible. They made sure one of the evenings we got lost in the sea. We were on a trawler. We had to share the whole trawler with them, two of us, with everything. But if I look back, those were pretty unique situations. And maybe because we were women, it had advantages also, and sometimes disadvantages also, but we didn't face anything specifically like that, except for people doubting whether we'll manage,
It's the well-meaning kind of doubting, right? Like I remember even during Bornwell, a lot of the questions were things like, will you manage in the forest, and how will you,
exactly.
How will you guys manage? And so how important did you find that support that you had from family and peers and community was for you to be able to do what you do in this space?
No, absolutely. I think, I was very, very fortunate to have fantastic parents, fantastic siblings. And I think for Ma Baba, like, they were both professors, as I said, in the university. And right from childhood, I think I have a brother and we are two sisters. I think it was always like there was no, I mean, one, they gave us all the freedom. They never told us what to do. They said, like, whatever you do, we'll support you. So it was a very open house. And I guess because they were teachers, our house was full of students. So they lived what they said. Like the house was open, their thought process was very liberal. And we grew up with a lot of music, a lot of openness. It wasn't about money. I mean, they were teachers, so there wasn't a lot of money, but that was never a core to our happiness or core to what we wanted to do. So all three of us actually had a lot of freedom, and that did play a role. I never, I mean, I could talk to them openly. I had no idea after school what I was going to do, but there was nothing from their side that. So I think that helped a lot. And again, like if I look at my interest in wildlife, my mother, in fact, at that time, it was Meerut University was very unique. There was Dr. S.D. Singh, who was one of the first primate professors. Like his work was on primates and on rhesus
Yeah.
monkeys, and he had set up a monkey lab. At that time, it was a very unique thing, and my mother did her PhD under him. And at that time, they were allowed to have captive monkeys, and she would go every morning and feed the monkeys. And at that time, and we didn't have a camera to record any of that. But yeah, so I think that has made a big difference. I mean, in the way one has led one's life, also. You know.
No, absolutely. So, coming to Green Hub and you setting that up, what kick-started that? I know you spent time in the Northeast filming, of course, and you've done a lot of work there. But what kick-started that? Because that was such an extraordinary and it was such a unique thing, never happened before. I mean, I'm not even just saying India. I don't think there've been too many spaces anywhere in the world where a filmmaker has decided to go to a part of the world that's either been underexplored or sort of marginalized by mainstream media, where the local people have never had a chance to tell their stories. And for the time that you set it up, to think that you could create a space where you would get local communities being able to tell their own stories was a very, very unique thing that you did. So what started that, Rita? Like, from in your career as you were making these films and you were winning all of these awards and you were doing so well, what made you take that step?
So, Swati, I think it was a thought which was there during my journey as a filmmaker. And I think with Mike and Riverbanks, I got a exposure to what was happening in the wildlife area. I mean, you traveled at that time. You traveled only by road. Your everything, your crew and everybody was in the car, and you traveled through India, and that was the best way to see India. And you went to all these wildlife places, and you saw that everything was about people and animals. At the same time, my family was working in rural India. My sister and all had set up a NGO called Samaj Pragati Sahayog in central India, and they were working with small scale farmers on watershed development. So I got a very unique lens where it was understanding what was happening with the forest, the wildlife, and the people, and what was happening on the other level where rural development is concerned. And while we were making films, I think so. My own learning, you can say, was because of films in some way. Like the video and filmmaking was my best teacher, more than school or anything. And at the same time, you saw what India was. You had these incredible people working in remote areas. You had so many stories all the time. As filmmakers, we used to shoot so many tapes for one film. Like, I'm sure you've also done that. We make a half an hour film, but you would have 50 tapes or 20 tapes, and that would just keep lying in the studio. So my thought was that, can we use these videos, the documentation part of it, for the NGOs, for training, for various purposes? That was one thought. And the other thought was that if today anybody wants to get into conservation filmmaking, there was no avenue, no platform. It was only if you joined a big studio. So it was only limited. That was the only way you could do it. Like, I could only do it because I joined riverbanks and I had access to riverbanks. And also, you were mad enough to then pursue your dream. What about 10 more people who want to do that but don't have access, but want to get into conservation film? Can we have a platform for that? So these are the two thoughts which were actually, I mean, in my head for more than 15 years before I started Green Hub, because you realize the value of these things only if you're in the field. So I think the idea of video documentation as a very important tool for education, for learning, for environment, for documenting what was disappearing, whether it's the honey hunters, whether it's the people in the village, the last person in the village who has that story about water or any indigenous knowledge. And at the same time, you have these young people who want to get into conservation films. At that time, it was that. So this idea kept brewing, and I think when I used to talk to people about it, they couldn't imagine it, that something like this could happen. And but all the work which I was doing after Riverbanks under Dusty Foot, I think my network increased a lot after I left, because we were doing our own films. We also started a conservation education program called Under the Canopy. So that was our first, that confidence that, okay, you can work with the community and you can add value to it. And that was in partnership with an NGO called Northeast Network. So gradually, by the time I started Green Hub, I think I'd established myself and Dusty Foot as a credible organization, as people took us seriously. And so my partnerships happened much faster. So when I finally pitched it for funding, it was already, the partners were there. They took us seriously. They knew, okay, they've been in the field for almost 15 years or whatever. So yeah, so that's how it happened. It took a long time. It wasn't like long time of thinking and doing and building a network and finally getting the funds to do it.
Yeah. And you brought up something very interesting, which is in India, when you do any story which is in this space of conservation, wildlife, nature, you cannot get away from, depending on the kind of films you do. I'm not talking about making a pure natural history film on animal behavior, but I'm saying anything that is topical, anything that is a story around the space, anything that is looking at an ecosystem from every angle. You cannot get away from the people, because it's so entwined with everything that happens in this country: culture, tradition, diet, just who you are. Like, everything is so entwined with the natural world around you. So one of the, like, you made that film, I think it was you did something on the meat trail, where you were
The wild
looking
meat
at
trail.
the wild meat trail. Exactly.
Yeah,
And I think at that time, what was interesting was you looked at it, and of course it's terrible when these animals are killed or poached or used for meat or whatever it is. But you also had the sensitivity to see that for many people it was a way of life. It was a cultural tradition. It was something that, maybe for generations that they'd done, especially indigenous people living in those spaces. That was their access to a lot of protein, in a sense.
Yeah.
So when in your space and career did you really stop and think, okay, these are not black and white issues, there's such heavy shades of gray? And how did that balance sort of come about?
I think that has been something which is, it's always been there. Like, I find it very difficult to take sharp positions. Like, I think I've never been sure of being absolutely fanatical about one side or the other. It's so situation based, and there's so many truths. And especially in India, everything is true and everything is false. Like, if you talk about poverty, it's true. If you talk about development, it's true. Everything is true, and it's in large numbers. So if you're in India, I think you learn to think in layers, you learn to absorb different perspectives. Because if you have to find a solution, ultimately, Swati, what are we working for? We are trying to find solutions. And you can't find solutions if we don't have the ability to look at different perspectives and converge that into the path which we are trying to create. So I think, and when you're making films, I think you have to do that, right? I mean, say for example, the Wild Meat Trail, exactly like what you said, one can either get totally shocked by the visuals or go behind the story and really see where is that coming from. And for me, the thing was that in the Northeast, people still have the forests, they still have wildlife, you know we've all come from spaces where everything is gone. So who are we to point fingers at them? There are many people who haven't even stepped out of the village. So how do they know that we've destroyed everything? So I think this thought has always been there in all our films. Like even when we are doing the film on turtles, it was with traditional fish workers and turtle conservation. And I think as a filmmaker, when you're actually I think this finding facts and then telling your story has been, I think, core to everything which we are doing. And Wild Meat Trail actually, like you said, played a very big role in pushing us to start Green Hub in some way. Because it was really like, say, Shows of Silence made a difference straight away. The film was there and people took it up, and the fish was,
Yeah,
it was an impactful film like that. Wild Meat
yeah,
Trail is not a film which you can show and tell people to stop hunting, but it makes you think that, hey, this is happening. You need to now move beyond the film and work with the community. And only over, and then the difference will be made, maybe, even then not. So I think Wild Meat Trail gave us that push to start the conservation education program. So it's a very, very important turning point, you can say. And that was in, I think, 2010 that got the Green Oscar, I
yeah,
think. And
yeah,
more
yeah,
than the award, I think it was that switch that we have to now work on the ground.
yeah.
Films are not enough.
No, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, because I remember being in Botswana, and it's weird. Living in India all my life, we have such an anti-hunting sentiment when it comes to conservation. No matter who's hunting, because I remember in Odisha they have that traditional hunting, which the
Mass
tribals go
hunting,
out,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, exactly, and some of it is very genuine and part of a culture, and a lot of it is just
Yes.
everybody wanting to hunt, and also it being a problem. Also
Yeah.
because the sheer numbers of what you could hunt at one time compared to what you can hunt now is it's obviously such a big difference. It's like you have less animals and more hunters, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But you still kind of have this notion that in conservation you cannot have hunting, and then you come to Africa and you see countries like Botswana, you see countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, where a long tradition of trophy hunting has actually helped a lot of species therefore commercially be viable and therefore be protected, and therefore numbers have come up, etc., etc. Trophy hunting has its own issues and problems and all of it. But what I'm saying is, you suddenly realize, hang on a minute, there's different parts of the world, there's different ways people do these
Yeah.
things. So it's such an interesting thing in conservation, where there's no one answer, one size fits all. So to me, that I feel is where the depth or the complexity in a film actually comes into play, as opposed to just doing a film that goes, oh, all hunting is evil, or oh, wow, all hunting is great, right? So
Yes.
as a filmmaker, and someone who teaches people to make films and teaches people to tell stories, and with all of your experience, what are some of the fundamental principles, if you would, for someone who's watching, who wants to get in this field, would be something that they should feel, follow, have, if they want to really be in this space and put the time, effort, and energy that it actually takes, and the patience to do what we do?
Swati, the core thing is being, I think, the research and the really going after the facts before you tell your story. Not to base it on, and also going into the field with a completely empty mind. Empty in the sense of, like, if I give you the example of Wild Meat Trail, we went with the idea of that traditional hunting is fine and poaching is bad. Like, that was the mindset with which we went. But over the years, when we started filming, we realized that wild meat hunting, mostly wildlife hunting, is mostly for food. But even that was having a huge impact because now the market had changed to the small towns. Earlier you would kill a deer, and like you said, the deer was shared. Village would get a call, "Hey, a deer has been killed," and the village families would share it. But now that deer was being taken to the market in a small town and being sold for 6,000 rupees. Or a bunch of birds, including sunbirds, the smallest bird, the hornbill, in a bunch of bird was being sold for 16. I mean, look at the value. It's nothing at all, but it was being sold for 2,000. It was almost like ATM, you know? So the scale of hunting, even for food, became a pretty large scale. So it wasn't hidden in this traditional hunting anymore. It was a market, and it wasn't not it. It can't be put under the poaching category. It wasn't being sold outside for the body parts or anything. It was just for meat. But the same people who in the village had moved into the city as circle officers, and they would want that meat. So I think when you're doing a film, um, the with I think the most important thing is to really have an open mind and be open to finding the facts. I think, as many facts as possible, and then seeing where your story is, you know and not just leaving it to your own thoughts. And I think that's especially with conservation, because when the film comes out, it comes out, and if any of those things are left loose, it can cause sometimes more harm than, because you are showing it to an audience. You are putting in, sometimes the way people perceive the community can be totally different in the way you put it across. So I think that would be my key thing. And I think at Green Hub, what we're doing is, it's mostly, if you see, it's mostly the voices of the people. So that's what we try, because the fellows are from those communities. They belong mostly to those tribes or to those regions. So when they come back with the film, it's mostly the voices of the women, the voices of the people, through which we are trying to tell the story, so that it also removes that extra narrative of our voices. So it's like a authentic piece of work. So yeah, how do you make a documentary as true as possible, because documentary also has a lot of fiction. So
Yeah.
so I think more and more I think of it. I did not, this whole nature of observational films, or the whole nature of voices from the ground, and how do you put yourself into it or not put yourself into it. I think it's good to keep learning. I think that would be my message. Don't get stuck to your way of making a film. Don't get stuck to one way of, I mean, tell your story as best as possible, and especially with wildlife and environment, with the correct information more than anything else. Yeah.
Do you feel now, Rita, you did mention that there wasn't too much of a space in which to do this kind of filmmaking or get it out there to the public if you didn't belong to a studio or you didn't have a platform. But do you feel now, with the way technology has changed, with everyone having cell phones and with YouTube and I don't know what the platforms are, I don't know, TikTok, whatever. Not that we have that in India, but you know what I mean, just different platforms. Do you feel like there are different platforms now on which for people to be able to tell these stories? That's number one. But the bigger question is, I think one of the big challenges, and I don't think we faced it so much because again, we lived in a slightly more gentle world at that time. I feel like one of the big questions would be, is there a way for people, especially women who come into the space, to be financially stable and independent in the space making these films? Because these are difficult. These aren't stories that are commercial or seen as commercial value that go out there that you get paid a lot for. So do you feel like maybe with the technology changing, people can actually get that monetized if they actually focus and do the work on different platforms? How does that work? Because that becomes a very big point of it, is especially as a woman, if you want to be financially independent and you want to be your own person and you're in this space, it's quite a challenging space in which to do that.
So, Swati, from the time actually from when we were making films to now for independent filmmakers, I think the opportunities have increased much more. Like, and you're right with the technology, what has happened is people can afford their own equipment. And if you really want to make a film, you can even use a phone, a good phone. I'm just saying to make a mark. And but if you see, even with National Geographic, you have much more funding for explorers now, which wasn't there when we were there. So many of the Indian filmmakers now are National Geographic explorers. So many other fellowships have come up, and even fellowships for, say, where even if you look at the women who are with Green Hub, who are just starting out, many fellowships in India, especially, have come up which support emerging filmmakers or storytellers. And whether it's Zuban, whether it's Pari, whether it's even WWF, and many other fellowships are there, which is very interesting. Because I see, like, I keep forwarding these to the fellows and they keep applying, and even little grants, it gives them a seed money, to take their story forward. So I think that way it has, because of technology, because of the social media presence, multimedia presence, like you have, people wanting stories in written and photographs and zines, for example, or so that way I think it has increased. What is still difficult is getting funding for your films, which is still like it was for your idea. But then recently, I don't know if you heard about Green Stories, we've created a pitching platform for filmmakers, seasoned filmmakers, and for new film, anybody, in fact, to so that they have access to global producers, channels, and are able to take their story idea forward. So Green Stories is, I think, only the only platform for environment films. But then you have Doc Edge and other platforms also. But funding for your own film is still a challenge. It's like, but I would say it's much more opportunities than where we were there when we were starting.
So at Green Hub, Rita, you've been operating it for a bit now. Do you find, just out of curiosity, demographically, is it more young men applying to come to Green Hub? Do you get more, or have the numbers of women slowly increased? What's the distribution like?
So the number of women over time has increased. Like when we started in the Northeast, our first batch just had 2 women out of 20. Now we have an average of 5 to 6. It's still lesser in number. But now the last 3 batches, we've had at least 6 to 7 women in every batch. But surprisingly, when we started in central India, where you would imagine there'll be lesser women, we almost have a 50-50%. It's also getting to learn about the different landscapes. So in central India, we have almost 10 women out of the 24. And in Western Himalayas also, where we started this year, there are more women in the batch. So it's pretty interesting that Northeast, where you would imagine there are more women, in fact, it's remained at that 6 or 5 or 6 in every batch, while Central and Western is much larger. But
Do you
definitely,
think that's a matter of, is it a matter of access? Is it a matter of society? Is it a matter of patriarchy? Is it a matter of family? Like, have you kind of gotten any sense of why that could be?
I think in the Northeast, one reason why we get lesser applications, I think most of the women are the farmers looking after the house, and our fellowship is a 1 year fellowship, where they have to give 1 year. So there itself, you can take a difference, because women are the ones looking after their home, and for them to take 1 year off is a challenge, because they're looking after everything. And I think it's easy. That's the only way I can put it, because it's been easier for, even our age ranges from 19-year-old to about 35, 40. But even then, I think women at a younger age are more involved with looking after the family, caring for the family, farming, doing multiple things. So for them to imagine to take off for 1 year, it becomes very difficult. So I think that itself is there. In some places, yes. Like the areas where we've had, like Mizoram, some of the villages, is the first time we've had women coming out of those villages and being part of a fellowship. And people who have been working there have, I mean, different places. I mean, obviously, I mean, it is a patriarchal society in even in the Northeast, you know. So,
Yeah.
and but again, then in Central India we have larger numbers. So I don't know if whether it's because of the number of organizations which are there. Northeast has lesser number of organizations
Mhm.
compared to the Central India in terms of intervention. So there can be many reasons for why these things are there. Yeah.
And do you find, since you look over so many projects and you get such a insight into the kind of stories that are being pitched to you and stories that are being told in the final product that emerges, do you find there is absolutely no gender difference in points of view when it comes to filmmaking, or do you find that there is a gender difference in points of view when it comes to filmmaking, just from a life perspective of how women and men see things?
Mm, see what we've seen, and I think how can I put it? I mean, there is a definitely a difference because, but I would say there's a when we like in our greener fellowship now we have this whole looking at the gender lens, and I think it's so easy for women to be invisible when people go for filming. You know, when the fellows first go for taking their doing the interviews, they all come back with, I mean, you'll have women working in the fields, you'll have women working in the homes, but the interviews will be all men, you know. And it's very funny, we've had because we make films with the organizations in the Greener Fellowship, you'll have an organization working with the village community, envisioning the next 20 years of that village, and they're doing this whole participatory exercise. And they're all men in that, and you keep wondering. And so, film is a very interesting medium also because when the fellows come back with the footage and you're looking at the footage and you're like, you have this whole dialogue, hey, where are the women? And you're
Mm.
talking about 20 years of that village. So what we've started doing is that we've started using the films and the whole process of film for the fellows to look through this whole. They have to come back and tell us about what are these simple answer these simple questions. You know,
Yeah.
uh, so definitely there's a bias which comes in naturally.
One of the reasons why it's really important to have women in this field of nature, environment, wildlife conservation spaces and filmmaking is because just their presence allows for women who are living in these communities, women who are living in spaces where they're facing these environment challenges, to feel that safety or just confidence to be able to come forth and then hear their points of view. And also, women possibly go in as filmmakers without an inherent bias because them being themselves, women who are expressing themselves, want to hear what the women have to say. So I feel like
Yeah.
this is a hugely important reason why we need more women in this space.
Yeah, yeah. Nee, and
Yeah.
also Swati, like the women from I mean, all the greener fellows who are women and who are from the communities, it makes a big impact when they go back into the community with the camera, you know, and because it's kind of breaking a barrier because there haven't been any women with the cameras and with technology, and obviously it opens up more access to the women who are there and the women who are filming. And so two of the Greener Fellows, in fact, are doing this entire project along with two researchers and an illustrator on women storytellers from the Northeast. So, it's again like, even now, like you were talking about an all women crew, the importance of it at that time. But here at the rural level, at the remote areas, this is again a all women crew and filming with the communities there. So they're doing stories with the Brokpas, and and the ease with which the communication is happening is much more. They're laughing, they're joking, they're like telling them, why don't you come with us? And come with us means it's like a trekking to their pastoral areas, which is like, and so Sarah and Chajo, who were filming, they were laughing. They said we had to climb on these matadors and go till a certain point and then trek up with them. But those women really wanted them to come because there was this whole friendship which formed, and that's so special. And I'll share a film with you later. There's this girl called Manisha. She's from Arunachal, and she was shooting in Nagaland. Okay, and I think just because she's a woman and she built this whole friendship with the she calls her a grandmother now. It's called she's from the Sanktam tribe, the woman, the grandmother.
Yeah.
And they became friends. The kind of openness with which they are in front of the camera, the whole relationship with the camera, the storytelling changes. So definitely, it has a lot of value in multiple ways. Multiple ways, I think. And as more and more women get into the field, I think the voices of the women will come out. And especially with environment, especially with farming, where it's almost like an invisible layer which is there, while they are the ones who are handling all the natural resources. And
Absolutely.
recently, it's I think that's where it's going to make a difference. Who's selling the land? Who's deciding that this land is going to have monoplantations? Are we asking those women who are working with the land there? So all the power positions are with the men, while all the hard work with the land use, everything is with the women. So I think it's one of the most important things which has to be done now. And I think that's where the storytellers, the filmmakers, I think absolutely, it has to expand, it has to increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you think about even whatever rules and regulations that come into play, climate change happens, or we have biodiversity loss, or whatever it might be. It's the women, even if you're not working directly with the land in terms of the farming, it's still the women who are going into the forest to collect natural resources, be it firewood, be it water. It's the women who pay a bigger price for not having facilities. We know, well, at least when I remember in Pori and Garhwal and stuff, when I was doing stories with leopard conflict, it was often women who were killed because they would go at dusk or dawn to use, they didn't have or whatever, they would go into the forest, and it's always a bad time in which to do that, but they could go in daylight because they didn't feel safe. It's so many additional layering upon layering that comes, and the number of stories I've done about young girls who either weren't sent to school or didn't get to study past third or fourth grade simply because they had to help their mother collect water, walking for miles in these rural areas just to collect water. So the disproportionate level of burden and life choices and what it actually does for the progress of women is so inversely proportionate to the fact that they really are not, they're so underrepresented in the decision-making spaces, or even in the spaces where opinions are solicited for what is the best way forward. And I think to have Green Hub and for you to be bringing in more women from these spaces and to have more women filmmakers, more women for conservation, and just speaking to more women in these stories, more women's stories, it's such an enormously important space forward for encouraging and inspiring more difficult women, which is our aim, really. Women who don't.
Let's hope more and more and more women get into this, and we have a whole party of
For sure.
For
sure. My last question then, Rita, would be what next? I know that you've started this thing with the green stories, where you said you have this pitching platform where people could come and maybe pitch stories and how that works. But really, what is Green Hub in terms of how many fellows do you have now? How many films are actually being made by the fellows? What's out there? What's your path forward?
So, Swati, the Green Hub project actually has expanded in many ways. So, the fellowship is like the foundation where we are using video as a tool of transformation. But what happens after the fellowship is very interesting because, it's not about film so much, because many of the fellows, after the fellowship, want to go back and work with the community, either with restoration, either with conservation education, sometimes documenting their own traditional knowledge. And then there's one cohort which likes to go in for films, conservation films, and all that. And some are going for jobs, applying to NGOs. Now, the ones who have decided to go and work with the community become our long term partners. And so, over the last 9 years, what has happened is we have many fellows, almost a cohort of 25, 30 fellows, who are just working with the community. So there's one mayor who's bringing the forest back. There's Sarah and Chaju who I talked about. They created a book on their district in Tirap on biodiversity, and now taking that to start a conservation education program. So we know how tough it is to work in conservation. So what we do is we work very hard with the alumni, and we create an ecosystem around the fellow. So once they have a thought that I want to grow the forest or I want to stop hunting in my village, we start working with them over the years. And this we do with a lot of collaboration with deep practitioners. Like, we are not the experts at restoration, we are not the experts in education. So what we do is we partner with a lot of organizations as well as people who are in that field. So, for example, Nature Conservation Foundation is our guiding partner in the restoration projects. We have now something called Canopy Collective, which is our partner in all the education modules. So now, so the whole philosophy is like a forest. Everything we do is interconnected. Everybody contributes, grows, and you almost grow a forest of people. That's how we call it. And so now what we have is we have the Green Hub project. We have something called conservation grants, which is grants for grassroots practitioners. And it's beyond Green Hub Fellows. It's not just Green Hub Fellows. So under that, we have almost 37 projects ongoing on the ground right now, which are directly related to conservation. We have a whole cohort of fellows now who are they've started the production houses at the regional level in Arunachal, in Assam. And recently we did a series of 50 short films for the Habitats Trust, all made by the Green Hub alumni. So the good thing is that the storytellers are also making the films on their fellows who are working in the field. And we also have now all the partners who have collaborated with us. Each one has their own vision for conservation. So, for example, there's Nandini Velo, who's working as a wildlife researcher and is trying to bridge the gap between science and action. There's Ravi Raj and Aditi who work in the therapy space, in the wellness space. There's Rintu and Sushmit who are storytellers. And so what we've done is we have, and there's Vanna and Debashish who work with rivers and stories around rivers. So we said, why not create an ecosystem where people with different visions of all our goal is the same, but we work together. So it's called the Living Labs. So we started the Living Labs where we have these collaborative labs. It's a physical space in Tezpur along with Green Hub. And each of these guys are all very deep practitioners in their own field. So it's like a transdisciplinary space. So it's not just Green Hub now, it's Green Hub and Living Labs. And also it kind of, how to say, it removes all barriers for conservation. Tomorrow, anybody wanting to come into this field should be able to walk into Living Labs and say, hey, I have an idea, I want to do this. And you have all these different people to support you. So that's what we are doing now. And we hope that this grows into a larger ecosystem. And we have Green Hub in Central India, and we've just started in Western Himalayas. So, but Northeast remains a pilot project. And that's what
Yeah,
we're
no,
doing.
that's amazing, because you're basically breaking the silos. That's one of the biggest problems I think all of us faced as well in this space. Definitely, as an environmental journalist, my biggest challenge was trying to, if you spoke to one person, then you couldn't go to another person who couldn't speak to a third person. Everything was proprietary, everything was, and I get it, some of it, but it's so great to have a space like you're creating. And I really feel like the whole cohort of people in the field are just so much more open and happy to open source, and really, because we see the challenges and we realize that it requires practically all hands on deck to kind of like, tackle, and definitely more women's hands on deck to do this.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
Rita, thank you so much for talking to me. Please continue to being an amazingly difficult woman for the Earth's sake. We really need more women for the Earth's sake to stay difficult. So just fantastic. Congratulations on everything that you're doing, and I hope it all goes amazingly well. Can't wait to visit Green Hub. And,
yes, you have to come.
See everything you guys are doing. But thanks a lot. It's
thanks
so
a lot,
great.
Swati. Thanks a lot, Swati. It was great. Thank you.